Rose Boone had 3 minutes to load the wagon before the land office closed, and the man blocking her path looked like he had all day. She tightened her grip on the supply list, paper crackling in her fist. The stranger wore trail dust like a second skin, and his eyes tracked her the way a wolf watches a rabbit that just broke cover. Every instinct she'd honed in 2 years of keeping Lost Creek Ranch alive screamed at her to move, to finish this errand, to get back behind her own fence line before someone asked questions she couldn't answer. But he didn't budge. Behind him, the assayer's office window reflected the noon glare, and inside that office sat the one document that could unravel everything. Her late husband's claim. A claim she'd signed his name to 6 months after they buried him, because the railroad syndicate was circling, and a widow without clear title was a widow without a home. The claim that made her a forger and a liar, and the claim that was the only thing standing between her and ruin. The stranger tipped his hat back with one finger. "You Rose Boone?" She lifted her chin. "Depends who's asking. Name's Emmett Cooper. I ride guard for the Central Pacific Line." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, creased and official. "I'm looking for a witness to a claim dispute. Man named Jack Ferris. Heard he worked your spread last summer." Rose's heart kicked against her ribs. Jack Ferris had worked Lost Creek exactly long enough to see her forge that signature. Long enough to know the date on the claim didn't match the date Marshal Boone died. He'd left town 2 days later with a month's pay and a promise to keep his mouth shut. If Emmett Cooper found him, if Jack talked, the railroad wouldn't need a corrupt land grab. They'd just wait for the sheriff to arrest her, and Lost Creek would go to auction inside a week. She kept her face smooth. "Haven't seen Jack since August." He moved on. "Try the silver camps north of here." Emmett's gaze didn't waver. "Funny thing about Jack Ferris. Every town I track him to, he's already gone. And every town, someone warns him I'm coming. That's not my problem," Rose said. "Now if you'll excuse me, I've got a ranch to run." She stepped around him, close enough to catch the scent of leather and wood smoke, close enough to see the faint scar along his jawline. He shifted his weight, not blocking her exactly, but not moving either. His voice dropped low enough that the busybodies on the boardwalk couldn't hear. "I'm not here to make trouble for you, Mrs. Boone. But there's a syndicate lawyer named Horace Gant, buying up every small claim between here and the railhead. He's not particular about how he does it. If you're hiding something, he'll find it. And he won't be as polite as I am." Rose met his eyes, those tired gray eyes that looked like they'd seen too many lies and not enough sleep. For half a second, she wanted to tell him. Wanted to lay the whole tangled mess at his feet and let someone else carry the weight. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd learned that the hard way. "I'm not hiding anything," she said. "And I don't need a railroad guard's protection." She brushed past him, pulse hammering, and made it 3 steps before his voice followed her. "Your husband was a marshal. He put my brother away for rustling 10 years back. Fair trial, clean arrest. I respected him for it. So I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Whatever you're running from, it's about to catch up." Rose didn't answer. She hauled herself onto the wagon seat, snapped the reins, and drove out of town like the devil was chasing her. Which, in a way, he was. By the time she reached the turnoff to Lost Creek, her hands were shaking. She forced herself to breathe. Emmett Cooper was a complication, but not a disaster. Not yet. As long as Jack Ferris stayed lost, as long as the claim held, she could weather this. She'd weathered worse. She'd buried a husband who died stopping a stagecoach robbery, spent a winter alone on a ranch with no crew and no money, and clawed her way to something like respect in a town that thought widows were either charity cases or available. She wasn't about to lose it all because some railroad guard with a conscience decided to poke around. The ranch house sat in a shallow basin where Lost Creek carved through red stone, cottonwoods shading the yard, barn and corral neat as she could keep them. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Or it would be, if the claim held. She unloaded the supplies, checked the stock, fixed a loose board on the chicken coop. Normal work. Steady work. The kind that kept your mind from spinning out. By sunset, she'd almost convinced herself Emmett Cooper would move on, chase his witness somewhere else. Forget about the widow with the tight mouth and the nervous eyes. Then, she saw the smoke. Not chimney smoke, not a cook fire. Thick black smoke rolling up from the direction of town, close to the railhead depot. Rose climbed onto the corral fence for a better view, shading her eyes against the red glare of dusk. A building burning. Maybe more than one. And even at this distance, she could hear the shouts, the crack of something collapsing. Her stomach twisted. Fire in a frontier town was every nightmare at once. She should go. She should hitch the wagon and ride in. Help however she could. But the last thing she needed was to be in town tonight. Visible. Memorable. When Emmett Cooper was already sniffing around her business. She was still weighing it when she heard hoofbeats. Fast. Hard. Coming up the ranch road. Rose jumped down, instinct pulling her toward the house and the rifle she kept by the door. But the rider came into view before she could reach it. Emmett Cooper, hatless now, soot streaked across his face, horse lathered and blowing. He reined up in a spray of dust and swung down like a man who didn't have time for courtesy. They torched the land office, he said. Every claim record in Sunset Springs just went up in smoke. Rose felt the ground tilt under her. The land office. Her claim. The one piece of paper that stood between her and disaster. Gone. She braced herself against the corral rail. Who? Gant's men. Cooper's voice was rough with exhaustion and fury. They waited until the clerk went home, broke in, set it clean. Sheriff's trying to salvage what he can. But it's too late. Everything's ash. Rose's mind raced. If the claim was gone, she had no proof. No proof she owned Lost Creek. No proof the title was clear. The railroad could challenge her in court, drag it out until she couldn't afford to fight, then take the ranch for unpaid fees. Unless she had another copy. Unless she could produce the original. The original she'd forged, locked in a tin box under her bedroom floorboards. The original that would save her ranch and hang her at the same time. She looked at Emmett, soot-streaked and righteous, and knew she couldn't show him that paper. Not ever. Why come here? She asked. Because you're next. He took a step closer. And in the fading light, his eyes were shadowed, urgent. Gant's not burning records for fun. He's clearing the field. Anyone without a certified copy, anyone who can't prove their claim in the next 48 hours, loses it to default. The railroad's lawyer is already filing. You have a copy of your deed? Rose hesitated 1 second too long. Cooper's expression shifted, something hard and knowing settling into place. You don't, he said. Or you do. And there's a reason you don't want to show it. I don't need your help, Rose said, but her voice came out thinner than she wanted. Yes, you do. Cooper stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. I know what a scared woman looks like, Mrs. Boone, and I know what a land grab looks like. If you've got something that proves this ranch is yours, you need to file it tomorrow. Judge Cartwright is holding an emergency session. Anyone who doesn't show up loses their claim by default. And if I show up, Rose said slowly, what happens when someone asks questions about the date, about the signature, about whether a grieving widow really had the presence of mind to file a proper claim 2 weeks after her husband's funeral? Emmett went very still. Then, quietly, is it forged? Rose looked at him. This man she'd known for all of 4 hours. This man whose brother her husband had arrested. This man who had every reason to see her hang, and no reason at all to protect her. She should lie. She should throw him off her land. Bar the door. Take her chances. But exhaustion and fear, and 2 years of carrying this alone, made her reckless. She met his gaze. Would it matter if it was? For a long moment, he didn't answer. The last light drained out of the sky, and the temperature dropped the way it always did on the high desert. Finally, Emmett said, it would matter to the judge. It would matter to Gant. But it doesn't have to matter to me. Why? Rose demanded. Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Because my brother died in that prison, Cooper said. Lung fever, 6 months into his sentence. In my last letter to him, I told him he was a fool and a thief, and I was ashamed to share his name. He took a breath, harsh and unsteady. Your husband was right to arrest him. The law was right, but I wasn't right. And I've spent 10 years trying to figure out how to live with that. So maybe I'm helping you because I can't help him. Or maybe I just don't like watching railroads steal what doesn't belong to them. Take your pick. Rose stared at him. In the near dark, his face was all angles and shadows, exhaustion, and something that looked like honesty. She'd been lied to by experts, gamblers, drifters, men who smiled while they calculated how much her ranch was worth. Emmett Cooper didn't smile. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how. That's the saddest reason I've ever heard, she said. Doesn't make it less true. He glanced toward the house. You have that deed or not? Rose wavered. Every instinct said no. But the fire changed the equation. If she didn't act, Gant would take Lost Creek without a fight. If she acted alone, she'd hang. If she trusted Emmett Cooper, she might, just might, buy herself enough time to figure a way out. She turned toward the house. Come on. But if you're lying to me, I'll shoot you myself. Fair enough, Cooper said, and followed her inside. The tin box was right where she left it, under the bedroom floorboards behind the old trunk. Rose pulled it out, hands steadier now that the decision was made, and carried it to the kitchen table. Emmett lit the lantern, and in the spill of yellow light, she opened the box. Inside, the deed to Lost Creek Ranch, signed in her late husband's hand. Except it wasn't his hand. It was hers, practiced and careful, copied from a letter he'd written her 3 years back. The date was 6 months after he died. The witness signature belonged to Jack Ferris, who'd watched her do it and kept his mouth shut for $30. Emmett picked up the paper, held it close to the light. His face gave nothing away. After a long moment, he set it down. This is good work. If I didn't know to look, I wouldn't catch it. But you're looking, Rose said. He met her eyes. Yeah, I am. He leaned back, tapping one finger on the table edge. Here's the situation. Gant's going to challenge every claim that comes through tomorrow. He'll have a handwriting expert, probably someone from Denver. If you file this, they'll compare it to any other document your husband signed. Letters, arrest records, anything on file at the courthouse. How many of those are there? Rose's throat tightened. Dozens. Marshal Boone had been a stickler for paperwork. Every arrest, every report, signed and filed. I'm done, she said flatly. Aren't I? Not yet. Emmett rubbed his jaw, thinking. We need to muddy the water. If there's enough chaos tomorrow, enough competing claims and angry ranchers, the judge won't have time for a handwriting analysis. He'll take the deed at face value and rule. Then even if Gant figures it out later, you've got legal possession. Harder to overturn. And how do we create chaos? Rose asked. We get every other small rancher in this valley to show up with their claims. We make it a circus. Emmett's mouth crooked, not quite a smile. And we give the judge a reason to rule fast and get out of town before the shooting starts. Rose studied him. You're serious? You want to start a range war to cover for my forgery? I want to keep Gant from stealing half the valley. Your forgery's just part of the picture. He stood, pacing the small kitchen like a man who thought better on his feet. Who else lost their records in that fire? 3, maybe 4 families. The Pritchards, the O'Rourkes, Tom Sadler. Rose paused. And the Farrell clan. Emmett stopped. The Farrells. Your husband arrested Joel Farrell for cattle theft, didn't he? 5 years ago. Rose's stomach sank. She saw where this was going. They've hated me ever since. Blamed me for testifying. Joel's brothers ran me off the road last spring, told me I wasn't welcome at the stockyard auction. Perfect, Emmett said grimly. If the Farrells show up tomorrow, and you show up, and I'm standing next to you, they'll cause a scene. Judge won't have time to think about signatures. He'll just want to get through the docket and get home alive. You want to use a family feud to cover my tracks, Rose said slowly. That's your plan. That's half the plan. The other half is finding Jack Ferris before Gant does. Emmett turned back to her, and in the lamplight his face was all hard plains and determination. If Jack testifies that he watched you sign that deed the day after your husband died, you're clear. If he testifies to what really happened, you hang. So we find him first, and we convince him to remember it our way. Rose felt a wild laugh building in her chest. This is insane. You know that, right? Completely, Emmett agreed. You have a better idea? She didn't. And that was the worst part. She looked at the deed, at the careful forgery that had kept her alive for 2 years, at the man standing in her kitchen proposing a scheme that would either save her or doom them both. Finally, she said, if we do this, if we pull this off, you're an accomplice. Gant finds out, you'll lose your job. Maybe worse. I quit the railroad this morning, Emmett said. Soon as I saw that smoke, I'm done taking their pay while they burn people out. He held her gaze. So I guess we're both betting everything on a long shot. Might as well bet together. Rose didn't let herself think, didn't let herself weigh all the ways this could go wrong. She just nodded, once, sharp. All right, we do it your way. But first thing tomorrow, we ride out and find Jack Ferris. Because if he talks to Gant before we find him, none of this matters. Agreed. Emmett picked up his hat from the chair. I'll bunk in the barn tonight. We leave at first light. The next morning came fast and cold. The kind of high desert dawn that burned your lungs and made you question every choice that brought you outside before the sun. Rose saddled her mare by lantern light, fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. Emmett was already up, checking his rifle, his face drawn and focused in the gray light. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. The plan was simple. Ride north to the mining camps, find Jack Ferris, convince him to lie under oath, and get back to Sunset Springs before the judge's session ended. Simple, except for the part where Jack might already be dead, or bought off, or halfway to California. Simple, except for the part where the Farrell brothers might decide today was the day to settle old scores. Simple, except for the part where Rose was trusting a man she'd known for less than a day, with her life, her land, and her freedom. They rode out as the first pink light hit the peaks, following the old freight road that skirted the valley and climbed into broken country. Emmett set a hard pace, and Rose matched it without complaint. She'd grown up on horseback, learned to ride before she could read, and she wasn't about to let some railroad guard think she couldn't keep up. By mid-morning, they'd covered 10 miles, and the ranch was a memory behind them. The land opened into sage flats and red rock cuts, empty except for the wind and the occasional hawk circling overhead. It was beautiful and brutal, the kind of country that killed you if you weren't careful, and Rose had never loved it more. This was what she was fighting for. Not just the ranch, not just the house. This. The freedom to ride out at dawn and know the horizon was hers. Emmett pulled up beside a dry wash, dismounted, checked the tracks in the dust. Someone came through here yesterday. 3 horses, maybe 4. Moving fast. Gant's men? Rose asked, swinging down. Or the Farrells? Or just freighters? Hard to say. He straightened, scanning the ridgeline. But we're not alone out here. Stay sharp. They pushed on, climbing into rougher country, where the road narrowed and the drop-offs got steep. Rose's nerves wound tighter with every mile. This was ambush country. The kind of place where a rifleman could sit behind a rock and pick you off before you heard the shot. She loosened her rifle in the saddle scabbard and kept her eyes moving. Emmett rode easy, relaxed in the saddle, but his hand never strayed far from his gun. He'd done this before, she realized. Ridden into bad country expecting trouble. It should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel oddly safer, like maybe she'd picked the right partner for this particular brand of stupid. They reached the first mining camp by noon, a ragged collection of tents and shanties clinging to a hillside above a played-out creek. Emmett did the talking, asking after Jack Ferris in a half-dozen saloons and supply shacks. Nobody'd seen him. Or if they had, they weren't saying. Rose waited outside, watching the street, feeling the weight of hostile eyes. Miners didn't trust strangers, and a woman riding with a man who asked too many questions was trouble they didn't need. By the third camp, Rose's stomach was knotted with frustration. Jack wasn't here. He'd moved on, or gone to ground. Or maybe Gant had already found him and paid him to disappear. Then, in a supply shack that smelled of tar and tobacco, the clerk's eyes flickered when Emmett said Jack's name. Rose caught it, the tiniest hesitation, and stepped forward. "We're not lawmen," she said quietly. "And we're not working for the railroad. We just need to talk to him." 5 minutes. The clerk looked her over, weighing it. Finally, he said, "There's a cabin up the gulch, half-mile past the stamping mill. Red door. He was there 2 days ago. Don't know if he still is." They found the cabin exactly where the clerk said, tucked into a side gulch where the pines grew thick and the light came slanted and green. The red door was faded to rust, and the whole place had the look of somewhere a man went to hide. Emmett dismounted, motioned Rose to stay back, and approached on foot. Rose ignored him and followed, rifle in hand. If Jack was inside, if this went bad, she wasn't going to sit on her horse and watch. Emmett shot her a look but didn't argue. He knocked. 3 sharp raps. Nothing. He knocked again. "Jack Ferris." "It's Emmett Cooper." "I'm not here to arrest you. I just want to talk." Silence. Then, from inside, a voice rough with drink, or fear, or both. "Go away." "Can't do that, Jack." Emmett kept his tone easy, reasonable. "We need your help. Rose Boone's here with me." "You remember Rose. You worked her ranch last summer." A longer silence. Then the scrape of a bar lifting, and the door cracked open. Jack Ferris peered out, looking 10 years older than Rose remembered. He'd been a wiry kid with a quick smile, always ready with a joke. Now he looked hunted, gray-faced, eyes jumping from Emmett to Rose and back. "What do you want?" "We need you to come to Sunset Springs," Rose said. "Judge is holding a land claim session this afternoon. I need you to witness my deed." Jack's face went flat. "No, absolutely not. You're crazy if you think I'm going back there." "Gant's men are looking for you," Emmett said. "You know that, right? They burned the land office to cover their tracks. But they're not done. They need to make sure nobody can contradict their version of things. That includes you." "I didn't see anything," Jack said quickly. "I don't know anything. I'm just a drifter. Nobody cares what I say." "Gant cares," Rose said. "Because you were there, Jack. You saw me file that claim. You signed as witness. If you testify, I keep my ranch. If you don't, I lose everything." She stepped closer, letting him see her face, letting him see that she meant it. "And if Gant finds you first, you don't walk away. You know too much." Jack's hand shook on the doorframe. They already tried. 3 nights ago. 2 men, asking questions in the camp. I ran. Been moving every night since. His voice cracked. "I can't go back, Mrs. Boone. I'm sorry. But I can't." "Then you're dead," Emmett said flatly. "Because Gaunt doesn't leave loose ends. Your only chance is to come with us, testify, and hope the law protects you long enough for Gaunt to move on. It's not a great chance. But it's the only one you've got." Rose watched Jack's face, watched the fear and the exhaustion and the desperate calculation. She remembered him at Lost Creek, young and eager, trying to prove himself. She remembered paying him off, watching him ride away with that terrible knowledge locked behind his teeth. She'd bought his silence then. Now she needed his voice. Please, Jack, she said quietly. I know I'm asking a lot, but you're the only person who can make this right. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. But if I do this, if I testify, you get me out of this valley. Gant or no Gant, I'm not staying where people remember my name. Deal, Rose said, before Emmett could object. We'll get you north to the railhead, put you on a train, and you'll never hear from us again. Jack opened the door the rest of the way. Give me 5 minutes to pack. They rode hard for Sunset Springs, 3 horses strung out on the trail, the afternoon sun hammering down like a forge. Jack kept looking over his shoulder, jumpy as a green-broke colt, and Rose didn't blame him. She felt it too, the prickle between her shoulder blades that said someone was watching. They were exposed out here, visible for miles, and if Gant had men trailing Jack, this was the perfect place for an ambush. Emmett seemed to feel it too. He pushed the pace, taking risks on the downhill stretches, cutting across open ground instead of sticking to cover. They had maybe 3 hours to make town before the judge closed the session. Maybe less, if the Farrells caused the kind of trouble Emmett was counting on. They were halfway down the valley, close enough to see the smoke from Sunset Springs chimneys, when the shot cracked across the stillness. Rose's horse shied, and she fought it under control, pulse hammering. Emmett was already moving, pulling his rifle, scanning the ridgeline. There, 2 riders, maybe 3, coming hard from the east. Can't tell if it's Gaunt's men or the Farrells, but we're not waiting to find out. Ride! They kicked into a gallop, horses stretching out, hooves pounding the hardpan. Another shot, closer this time, and Rose heard the whine of the bullet passing. Jack yelped, bent low over his horse's neck. Emmett dropped back, putting himself between the pursuers and Rose, and she wanted to shout at him, tell him not to be a fool, but there wasn't time. The town was close now, close enough to see individual buildings, close enough to hope. If they could make it to the main street, to witnesses, to the judge's temporary courthouse, they'd be safe. Maybe. They thundered into Sunset Springs in a cloud of dust, scattering chickens and drawing stares. Emmett pointed toward the church, where the judge had set up his bench. Rose didn't slow down. She rode straight up to the hitching rail, half fell off her horse, and dragged Jack with her. Emmett followed, rifle still in hand, covering their backs. The street was full of ranchers and townspeople, all waiting their turn, all talking at once. And there, near the front, arms crossed and faces hard, stood the Farrell brothers. 3 of them, broad and mean, with the kind of eyes that promised violence. When they saw Rose, the oldest one, Caleb, smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Well, Caleb said loudly, so half the street could hear, if it isn't the Marshal's widow. Come to beg the judge for mercy, Rose? Or are you finally ready to admit your man was a liar and a fraud? Rose's temper flared, but Emmett's hand closed on her elbow, steady and warning. Not now, he murmured. Let it go. But Caleb wasn't done. He stepped forward, and his brothers moved with him. Heard about the fire, he said. Shame about those records. But then, I guess you don't need records when you've got a forged deed, do you? The crowd went quiet. Rose felt every eye on her, felt the weight of accusation settle like a noose. Emmett stepped forward, putting himself between her and Caleb. You You've got proof of that, Farrell? Or are you just talking because you like the sound of your own voice? Caleb's smile widened. I've got all the proof I need. My brother's rotting in a grave because of her husband. And now she's trying to steal land that doesn't belong to her. Judge ought to know what kind of woman he's dealing with. That's enough. The voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. Judge Cartwright stood in the church doorway, black robe over his town clothes, face like a thundercloud. This is a legal proceeding, not a saloon brawl. You've got a claim to file, Farrell. You file it proper. Otherwise, shut your mouth and let me do my job. Caleb glared, but backed down. The judge swept his gaze over the crowd. I'm hearing claims in order of filing. Anyone who's not next in line, clear the steps. Rose Boone, you're up. Rose's heart hammered as she climbed the steps, Jack and Emmett flanking her. Inside the church, the judge had set up a makeshift bench, and a clerk sat ready with a ledger. The room smelled of candle wax and old wood, and the light through the stained glass threw colored shadows on the floor. Rose handed over the deed with hands that almost didn't shake. Judge Cartwright examined it, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. This is dated 6 months after your husband's death, Mrs. Boone. Care to explain that? My husband filed the original claim before he died, Rose said, voice steady. But the paperwork was lost in a clerical error. I refiled with the assayer's office to correct the record. Jack Ferris witnessed the filing. He's here to testify. The judge looked at Jack. That true, son? Jack swallowed hard. Yes, sir. I was working her ranch at the time. Saw the whole thing. Judge Cartwright's eyes narrowed. And you're willing to swear to that, under oath? Jack hesitated, just a fraction of a second, and Rose's stomach dropped. Then Jack nodded. Yes, sir. I swear it. The judge studied the deed for another long moment. Then he stamped it, signed the ledger, and handed it back to Rose. Claim stands. Lost Creek Ranch is legally registered to Rose Boone. Next case. Relief hit Rose like a wave, so strong her knees almost buckled. Emmett's hand was on her back, steadying her, and she looked up at him and saw the same fierce relief in his eyes. They'd done it. Against every odd, against every piece of sense. They'd actually done it. Jack let out a shaky breath, and Rose caught his arm. Thank you, she whispered. I won't forget this. Just get me out of here, Jack muttered, before Gant figures out what happened. They pushed through the crowd, ignoring the stairs, and made it to the street. The sun was low now, painting the buildings gold and red, and Rose wanted nothing more than to ride home and sleep for a week. But Caleb Farrell was waiting at the hitching rail, and his brothers were with him. The oldest one spat into the dust at Rose's feet. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Emmett said quietly. The judge ruled. The claim stands. Walk away, Farrell. Caleb's hand dropped to his gun. You don't give me orders, Cooper. I don't care if you used to ride for the railroad. Out here, you're nobody. Emmett didn't move, didn't reach for his own gun, but his voice went cold and flat. I'm the man standing between you and her. That makes me somebody. Now walk away, or we settle this right here. For a long, terrible moment, Rose thought Caleb would draw. Thought she'd see blood on the street, and a man dead over her forgery and her pride. But then, a new voice cut in, smooth and poisonous. Gentlemen, Let's not be hasty. Horace Gant stepped out of the general store, dressed like a Denver lawyer, clean and cold and smiling. He looked at Rose the way a snake looks at a mouse. Mrs. Boone, congratulations on your claim. I'm sure the railroad will be very interested to review the documentation. The railroad doesn't have standing to challenge, Emmett said. The judge ruled. Oh, I'm aware. Gant's smile widened. But the judge didn't have access to certain records that I've recently acquired. Letters, for instance, written in Marshal Boone's hand. I'm sure a handwriting expert would find them very illuminating when compared to that deed you just filed. Rose's blood turned to ice. Gant had her husband's letters, which meant he could prove the deed was forged, which meant the judge's ruling didn't matter. She'd won the battle and lost the war. Emmett's hand tightened on her arm, and she could feel the tension in him, the coiled readiness to fight. But there was nothing to fight. Gant had outmaneuvered them. Unless Rose gave him something else to worry about. She stepped forward, chin high, voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. Then I guess we'll see you in court, Mr. Gant. And while we're at it, maybe the judge will want to hear about the men you sent to kill Jack Ferris, or the fire you ordered at the land office. Arson's a hanging offense in this territory. So is attempted murder. Gant's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Careful, Mrs. Boone. Accusations like that require proof. So do forgery charges, Rose shot back. Seems like we're both gambling on what a jury will believe. The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then Gant tipped his hat, mockery in every line. Enjoy your ranch, Mrs. Boone, while you still can. He turned and walked away, and the Farrell brothers followed him like dogs on a leash. Rose watched him go, heart still racing. That was insane, Emmett said quietly. You just declared war on a man who burns buildings and kills witnesses. I know, Rose said. But what else was I supposed to do? Let him walk all over me? Emmett shook his head, but there was something like admiration in his eyes. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most reckless. Haven't decided which. Can it be both? Rose managed a shaky smile. Come on. Let's get Jack to the railhead, and then get out of this town before someone else tries to shoot us. They rode out as the sun touched the horizon, 3 horses moving fast through the gathering dusk. Jack caught a northbound freight an hour later, shook Rose's hand once, and disappeared into the darkness. Rose and Emmett turned south, riding in silence through country that felt bigger and emptier now that the adrenaline was fading. By the time they reached Lost Creek, Rose was so tired she could barely stay in the saddle. Emmett helped her down, saw to the horses, and stood in the ranch yard like he didn't quite know what to do next. You can stay, Rose said, if you want. It's late, and I don't love the idea of you riding alone after everything that happened today. Emmett looked at her, and in the starlight his face was shadowed and hard to read. I don't think that's a good idea, Mrs. Boone. Rose. Just Rose. And why not? Because, Emmett said slowly, I'm not sure I trust myself to keep this professional. You're brave and stubborn, and you make terrible decisions. And for some reason I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to kiss you. So unless you want that complication on top of everything else, I should probably ride out now. Rose stared at him. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she crossed the space between them and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was rough and desperate. Two people who'd survived the worst day of their lives and needed to prove they were still alive. Emmett made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer, hands tangling in her braid. And for a few seconds the world narrowed to heat and need and the taste of dust and risk. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "That was a terrible idea," Rose whispered. "Worst one yet," Emmett agreed. "But I'm not sorry." "Me neither." Rose leaned her forehead against his, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness she'd been craving without knowing it. "Stay. Please. I don't want to be alone tonight." Emmett's arms tightened around her. "All right. I'll stay." They didn't talk about what it meant, didn't plan the next step or make promises they couldn't keep. They just went inside, shared a simple meal of bread and cold meat, and sat by the fire until exhaustion pulled them under. Emmett made up a bedroll on the floor, and Rose lay awake in the next room, listening to his breathing, feeling safer than she had in 2 years. She didn't let herself think about Gant, or the handwriting expert, or the war that was coming. Tonight, she'd won. Tonight, she had her land, and a man who'd ridden into danger for her, and that was enough. But morning came too fast, and with it, reality. Rose woke to the sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast. She bolted out of bed, grabbed her rifle, and met Emmett in the main room. He was already at the window, gun drawn, face grim. Company. At least 6 riders. Could be Gant's men. Could be the Farrells. Either way, this is bad. Rose's heart sank. So much for a quiet morning. She checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, and took up position at the other window. "What do we do?" "We hold them off until the sheriff gets here." Emmett glanced at her. "You sent for him, right?" Rose's stomach dropped. "No. I didn't think we'd need him this fast." Emmett cursed, low and inventive. "All right. New plan. We make enough noise that someone in town hears, and we hope they're curious enough to ride out." He looked at her, and his eyes were steady, calm, like this was just another day. "You ready for this?" "No," Rose said honestly. "But I'm not giving up my ranch without a fight." The riders pulled up in the yard, spreading out in a loose half-circle. Caleb Farrell sat his horse in the center, flanked by his brothers, and 3 men Rose didn't recognize. Hard-looking men, the kind who got paid to make problems disappear. Caleb called out, loud enough to carry. "Rose Boone, you've got one chance to make this easy. Sign over the deed to Gant's company, and we ride away peaceful. Refuse, and we burn you out like the land office. Your choice." Rose leaned out the window just far enough to be seen. "I already made my choice, Caleb. And it doesn't include you or Gant." Caleb shook his head, almost sad. "Wrong answer. Boys, torch it." 2 men dismounted, pulling torches from their saddlebags. Rose fired, aiming for the ground near their feet, and the crack of the rifle split the morning. The men scattered, cursing. Emmett fired a second later, clipping one man's hat clean off. The message was clear. Come closer, and we shoot to kill. Caleb's face went dark with fury. You want to play it that way? Fine. We'll dig you out. The siege began. For the next hour, it was chaos. The Farrells and their hired guns circled the house, taking pot shots. trying to get close enough to set a fire. Rose and Emmett moved from window to window, firing just enough to keep them back, conserving ammunition they couldn't afford to waste. The house was solid, built to last, but it wouldn't stand up to a determined torch. And Rose knew, with sick certainty, that Caleb wasn't bluffing. He'd burn her out, kill them both if he had to, and claim it was self-defense. Unless help came. Unless someone in town heard the shooting and rode out. Unless a miracle happened. Then, through the smoke and noise, Rose heard new hoofbeats. A lot of them. She risked a glance and saw riders coming hard from town. At least a dozen, led by Sheriff Tom Braddock. The sheriff was old, careful, not a man who stuck his neck out for anyone. But he was also a man who'd respected Marshal Boone, and he didn't tolerate range wars in his county. He reined up between the house and the Farrells, rifle across his saddle, voice cutting through the chaos. "That's enough. Everyone drop your guns, or I start arresting people." Caleb hesitated, caught between fury and calculation. The sheriff's posse had him outnumbered, and the law for once was on Rose's side. Slowly, grudgingly, he holstered his gun. "This isn't over," he said, glaring at the house. "Yes, it is," the sheriff said flatly. "Gant's been arrested. Federal marshals rode in an hour ago with warrants for arson, attempted murder, and land fraud. Turns out the railroad didn't appreciate him torching their records to cover his embezzlement. He's going to trial, and anyone who worked for him is next. So unless you want to join him in a cell, Farrell, I suggest you ride out and don't come back." Caleb's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. He wheeled his horse and rode off, brothers and hired guns trailing behind. The sheriff dismounted, walked over to Rose and Emmett. "You two all right?" "We're alive," Rose said. "That's more than I expected an hour ago." Braddock nodded. "Gant's lawyer is cooperating. Says Gant kept records of every shady deal, every bribe, every threat. Your name's in there, Mrs. Boone. So is Jack Ferris's. Federal prosecutor's going to want statements from both of you." He paused. "But the good news is, your claim's not in question anymore. Gant's charges are dropped. Lost Creek Ranch is yours. Free and clear." Rose felt tears sting her eyes, and she didn't try to stop them. "Thank you, Sheriff. For everything. Don't thank me. Thank your friend here." Braddock nodded at Emmett. "He rode into town last night, woke me up, and convinced me that Gant was behind the fire. Federal marshals were already investigating. Cooper just gave them the last piece they needed." He tipped his hat. "I'll send someone out later for statements. In the meantime, get some rest. You've earned it." The sheriff and his posse rode off, leaving Rose and Emmett standing in the yard, dust settling, the ranch quiet again. Rose turned to Emmett. "You rode to town last night?" "After I fell asleep." "Couldn't sleep," Emmett said, a little sheepish. "Figured I'd make myself useful. Didn't expect the marshals to move that fast, but I'm not complaining." Rose started laughing, a wild, exhausted sound that turned into something close to crying. "You impossible man. You risked your neck again, and you didn't even tell me." Emmett pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him, let herself feel the solid reality of him. "I told you. I'm done watching railroads steal what doesn't belong to them. and I'm done watching you fight alone." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "So here's the thing. I don't have a job. I don't have a plan. But I have a horse, a gun, and a stubborn streak that won't quit. If you want help running this ranch, I'm offering. If you want more than that, well, I'm offering that too." Rose looked up at him. This man who'd ridden into her life with questions and walked out with her secrets. This man who'd stood between her and bullets. This man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "What exactly are you offering, Emmett Cooper?" "I'm offering to stay," he said quietly. "Build something with you. Partner, ranch hand, husband if you'll have me. I'm not much for pretty words, but I know this. I've never met anyone braver or more stubborn. And I don't want to ride away and spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Rose's throat tightened. "You know I forged that deed. You know what I did." "I know you survived," Emmett said. "I know you fought for what was yours, and you didn't let anyone take it. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of. Even if it was illegal?" "Even then." He smiled, faint and warm. "Besides," the judge ruled, "the claim stands. Far as I'm concerned, Lost Creek Ranch has always been yours. Everything else is just paperwork." Rose reached up, cupped his face, felt the rough stubble under her palm. "You're sure about this? You're really staying?" "I'm really staying," Emmett said. "If you'll let me." Rose kissed him, slow and sure this time. A promise instead of desperation. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "All right, Cooper. You've got yourself a ranch. And a very stubborn partner. Fair warning, I'm not easy to live with." "Good," Emmett said. "I'd be bored otherwise." They spent the rest of that day repairing what the siege had damaged, cleaning up bullet holes and broken glass, putting the ranch back together. It was hard work, satisfying work. The kind that made Rose feel like, maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. Emmett moved through the chores like he'd been doing them his whole life. And by sunset, they were standing on the porch, looking out over land that was finally, truly, hers. The sky burned orange and purple, and the wind carried the scent of sage and creek water. It was beautiful. It was home. Over the next weeks, they built something new. Emmett proved to be as good as his word. Steady, reliable, unbothered by hard work or long hours. He fixed the barn roof, mended fences, helped Rose bring in the late hay. The town slowly warmed to him, and Rose found herself smiling more, laughing more, feeling like maybe the weight she'd carried for 2 years was finally lifting. Gant went to trial and was convicted on 6 counts. The Farrells left the valley, chased out by shame and debt. And Jack Ferris sent a letter from San Francisco, saying he'd found work on the docks and was grateful, every day, that he'd told the truth when it mattered. One evening, as the first snow dusted the peaks, Rose and Emmett sat by the fire, planning the spring planting. Emmett reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit," Rose teased. He smiled. "I've been thinking we should make this official. Get married, I mean. If you want." Rose felt warmth bloom in her chest, bright and sure. "I want," she said. "I definitely want." They married in the spring, a small ceremony in the Sunset Springs Church, with the sheriff as witness, and a handful of neighbors who decided Rose Boone and Emmett Cooper were worth forgiving. Rose wore her best dress, cream linen with lace at the collar, and Emmett wore a new jacket and looked uncomfortable and happy in equal measure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission, and Rose kissed him back like she'd finally come home. Life at Lost Creek Ranch settled into a rhythm. There were hard days, of course. Days when the cattle got out, or a storm knocked down the new fence, or the well ran low. But there were good days too. Days when Emmett made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe. Days when they worked side by side in easy silence, building something that would outlast them both. Days when Rose looked across the table at her husband and thought, against all odds, I'm happy. Years later, when people asked how they met, Rose would smile and say it was complicated. Emmett would add that it involved a forged deed, a corrupt lawyer, and a very stubborn widow who refused to give up. And Rose would elbow him and say that wasn't the whole story. The whole story was about second chances, about trust earned in fire, about two broken people finding each other and choosing every day to stay. The whole story was about a ranch called Lost Creek and the love that saved it. And that, Rose always said, was a story worth telling.